All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Rich Mind podcast. Today, with co host Greg Young, we're going to dive into standards and expectations, self-expectations, self-standards, and how they're really very important in terms of success, achievement. This was a topic that Greg brought to my attention earlier today. And it's something that I had to actually do some deep thinking on for myself because I don't really think about this from a personal standpoint all the time because it really relates back into your habits and how you show up every day with whatever you're doing, whether it's recording a podcast, whether it's reporting to work, whether it's whatever that activity is. It really goes along with what standards you have for yourself, around yourself. Expectations was the word that came to my mind when he brought this idea of standards to me. That's the conversation we're going to have today. Why are having standards important? What are standards and expectations that you can and should have in place for yourself to achieve? So, the things we're going to share today will be opinions, but at the same time, I think that if you internalize what we're about ready to share, you will then set yourself up. It's that idea of taking control of the thoughts, of the activities that are going on around you to be able to move yourself to a different place. And that's kind of what we're hoping for with this episode today. So, standards, man, you brought this one to me, Greg. I appreciate it as always. We always go back and forth before we hit record, trying to come up with some different ideas, some things that are resonating with us in that moment. And I like this. We just had a brief conversation before we hit record, and it's like, this is going to be a lot of fun. So, tell me more. What are your thoughts on as far as the part of the standards and what made you want to bring this to the table on the podcast today?
Yeah, we talk a lot about habits on this podcast, and habits and standards, I think they deserve to be in the same conversation, but they're definitely different. To me, standards are guidelines that we basically set for ourselves to just live in, the day-to-day world. And they're in every area of our life. And we all have them, whether we know them or not, or whether we're aware of them or we are aware of them or not. But we definitely have them. Just because you don't write them down or you don't see them every day, they're definitely there. It's like an invisible boundary, that you definitely know is there, but you don't always see or feel. So yeah, standards. I heard of this on a podcast years ago, and it really resonated with me. And it made me think, what are my standards and where do mine come from and everything. So I wanted to bring this to you and to our audience today. And yeah, I think it's going to be a great conversation.
Love it. So we do talk about habits a lot. And so the standards conversation is almost like an extra layer to that. It's different, but it's very similar at the same time. That's kind of how I'm interpreting it in my own mind, even as we were starting to talk about it here today. So let me just pepper you with a few questions, right? And then we can just go back and forth with that. But when you think of standards and them being similar to habits but different, where do you think those standards come from? Do you think that it's something that we have? Is it something that we can change? Are they fluid or are they rigid? Does that make any sense? Any thoughts on that for the standards?
Yeah, I think a lot of them, I think to answer your question, probably a combination of everything. So I think they come from, our values and beliefs that we, receive as a child or as an adult. But I think also as an adult, we can, be self-aware and we can create our own standards because as long as we're aware of it, it's like creating a habit or creating a goal. You might have a goal as a kid, but you definitely have goals as an adult that you didn't have as a child. So you can definitely create them along the way. You can kind of take them from other people, just like you can take goals and habits and make them your own. So yeah, I think it's a combination of pretty much everything. Who you're around, that's a big influence on your standards, and also who you want to become. Because if you want to be the same person, you can have the same standards for the entirety of your life. But if you want to become better or bigger or whatever that looks like, you have to make some changes and raise your standards in one way or another.
So I remember back in my retail days that I was a manager of about 40 to 50 people, depending on the size of the store. So I was responsible for the building inside and out. And I remember in my department head type meetings all the time, we'd have them once a week. I remember mentioning or saying expectations was the word I used to use. And so I think that to me, when I hear the word standards, expectations is where I go almost instantly because I used to say that as encouragement to my people to have them there again set the standard. They needed to set the standard for their team. Each one of those department heads, I had maybe 5 6 different department heads depending on the there again the size of the location, would have another 10 to so more 10 to 12 people working for them or with them in their department. So they're responsible for those people's activities, right? What they did day to day. And I used to encourage them all the time. And they probably got tired of me saying it about just having the expectations for them. But they couldn't, it was going to be difficult for them to have the expectations for other people if they didn't have them and hold themselves to a higher standards, to those higher expectations. It's difficult to look up to someone that isn't necessarily doing things. I don't know if properly is the right way to put that. I'm not sure exactly what the right word would be. Maybe you can help me with that. But if you're looking up to someone, if you have a manager or you can be even a parent or somebody in your close proximity that you're trying to emulate, that you're trying to become, you're trying to move towards becoming that individual, if they're not necessarily doing the right things in the right way, setting a proper standard for themselves, it's going to be very difficult to get yourself to that place. They might have the things, they might have the money. I'm thinking of, if you're following quote unquote successful rich people, or however you want to put that in a monetary standpoint. But if you're following folks that are not necessarily living up to the standards and expectations, even of themselves, you might be walking down into a trap that might not necessarily, you might get to that destination following after in their footsteps, but not necessarily reaching your own expectations for yourself. So that was something definitely in the leadership realm that I tried to share. Like I said, I know I was sharing it with them weekly, if not daily. If I would see, a department head struggling with an individual or even with a customer or something like that, it was always, dude, or man or woman, didn't matter, right? I was dealing with both. It's like you've got to raise your expectations, not only of yourself or not only of the person that you're dealing with, but of yourself as well. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, especially yourself, because
Especially yourself.
yeah, because you're the only one that you can ultimately control, first of all. And then also, it's just leading by example, exactly what you're saying. You're not going to listen to somebody who, oh, do as I say, not as I do. Well, wait a minute. No. If you're not doing it, but you're telling me to do the opposite, but you're not leading by example, there's no credibility there. It's just, yeah, they're basically admitting, I know what I should be doing, but I'm not doing it, but you should be doing that because that's the right thing to do, even though I don't want to do it. So it's, when you kind of break it down, it's really like kind of paradoxical a little bit. But yeah, the do as I say, not as I do. I'm like, no, I'm gonna do as people are doing and as they're saying, because that, like you said, is the better example to live by and to set for others, especially in a leadership role.
So how do you, I love that. So how do you separate, how do you, when you see people or see things going on, let's say you're striving for a goal, you think you need to change your habits to achieve a certain goal, and you attach your mind or your activity, you're going to start going after this goal, but you are trying to find someone to resonate with, somebody that's speaking to you in terms of they have either said that they've done what you think you want to do, or they maybe show some of the things that they've done that have gotten to them to where in a different place to where you think you are right now. Is there a way that you figure out those standards and expectations for yourself to realize whether or not you're following somebody that is living up to those standards, not necessarily, I don't say fake, but at the same time just not necessarily honest, just not necessarily truthful? Any thoughts on that at all?
Yeah, that's a good question. I never really thought about it that way. I guess the only way I could really answer that question is if I'm finding somebody who achieved the same goal that I'm, after, really just asking them questions of, like, where did they come from? Did they come from the same starting point that I did? Because I know, like, in the fitness world, you see a lot of stuff on like YouTube or whatever, and somebody has like 6-pack abs and everything, and like, well, how did you get these 6-pack abs? Well, they go through their routine and they eat this and blah blah blah. But what they don't tell you is they've had like 9% body fat their whole life, right? So that's a
Yes.
different starting point than me, or, a lot of the average people that have an average body. That's not going to work because their standard from the beginning was, oh, well, they started out with 9% body fat and then they did the crunches and did the protein shakes and, did all that stuff, which is great. But I think asking them that question of, okay, where did you start from? Because I need somebody that is starting from, this point of view, or, this body weight or this body fat percentage, because then I can say, okay, you went from 30% body fat to 15. Now you're speaking my language because that's my goal and that's kind of where I'm starting from, or whatever that looks like. So I think it's really dialing down and asking the question, or finding out where they came from in the beginning, because they're not going to probably tell you like they've been skinny all their life and all you have to do is lift weights and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that works for them, but that's a different standard that I'm coming from, and I need to raise my standards. So I think just asking questions and really diving down into, what are both starting points.
Here, take this pill, drink this shake, and it's going to magically melt off.
That's
We've
right.
had
9% will show up.
100%. We've had conversations here lately on the podcast about some different goals I'm trying to do and achieve for myself. And yeah, if it was that easy, folks, yeah, trust me. But that's why those people that are out there selling those types of products, succeeds probably not the right word, but they might do well because of it sounds good. But yeah, in reality, unfortunately, it's just not that way. So the idea or thought that's coming to my mind as you're speaking there is, so it's almost like you just need to raise, it's like the line in the sand that I won't go back to who I have been in the past. One of the conversations I've been having with my wife lately is separating the idea between who you are, who you're being, you know what I mean, as a human being versus what you do, and completely separating those two things to the best of your ability. But so the idea behind that thought then is to raise these expectations of yourself, to raise your standard to the point where you don't need to go from whatever percent body fat to 9 or 8 or 5 or whatever the number is. That big of a gap is going to be a challenge. But if you can go from, let's say, 20 to 18 or to 15, that becomes your new standard. And when you set that standard, that's going to then change the activity. So that's where the whole being versus doing, I think that separation comes in. That if you can separate or focus on your standard being that's who I'm going to be. I'm going to be that person with whatever goal. But I'm not. So when you do set that standard, then that will change your activities instantly, because you won't go back to being that person before. So whether it's so we talk about health in this, as far as maybe on this conversation today, Greg, but as far as like when you choose for myself, I'll just use myself as an example. I've chosen to get myself physically better than I was back at the beginning of the year. So I've had to set the standard for myself that I'm going to reduce, if not eliminate, my alcohol drinking. I'm going to reduce or eliminate most, if not all, the carbs that I'm consuming. I'm going to increase an abundance amount of water that I'm intaking every single day. And that becomes the standard, which then allows me then to think through, and it holds me to that every single day. It's like an easy checklist in my mind. If I'm ready to do this, like let's just say pop, because Dr. Pepper, I think I've shared it. I love Dr. Pepper and I love bourbon, folks. If you haven't heard me say that, those are the two things. Those are two things I enjoy. Ice cream too. I like ice cream, pie. I'm a sweets guy. And even like I said, bourbons every now and then, and Dr. Peppers. Okay. Yeah. Send me one of those and I'll be a happy guy. But I've had to raise my standard, my own personal standard, to the point where even though I'm tempted to have those things, to do those things, it's an easy checklist. Does this, so when those triggers come in, when those opportunities present themselves for me to do those things, I can easily say, okay, does this meet my current standard of who I'm trying to become or not? And with that simple question allows me then to take control of that moment and not fall for consuming that thing that's going to derail me from this bigger vision of who I'm trying to be and who I'm trying to become. How was that? Did I articulate that
Yeah.
well? Tell me more. Tell me
Yeah.
what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And I think where we kind of get caught up is, we have those standards, but then we backtrack a little bit. And that kind of happens with, the 30-day diet or the 75 hard or all that kind of stuff. And we've all done them, right? But you kind of like on day 76 after 75 hard, you're like, well, what happens now?
Yeah, exactly. What
Like,
do I do now?
yeah, nobody tells
Because
you
that
that,
was
right? Because
75 hard days in a row.
the first 75, they are, strict and disciplined and whatever. But day 76, you're like, well, I can continue, or I could go back to having that Dr. Pepper on day 76, and
You
you're
like
right
Dr.
back
Pepper too,
into,
Greg?
yeah, I'm not trying to tempt you or anything,
Yeah,
but
you keep talking about it. I'm gonna have to go get one. No, I'm just kidding.
you can easily, and I've done it before, you start that habit all over again, even after 30 days or 75 days, and you remove that standard or you lower that standard back to quote unquote your normal. So you really have to make that decision. We've talked about deciding on this podcast quite a bit. Am I going to continue? Am I going to raise my standard? Am I going to keep the standard that I decided to raise previously, or am I going to lower it? And that's up to the individual. It's up, and it's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's a decision that we all have to make. And yeah, soda drinking is probably, it's a really great example because I've done that in the past. Luckily, I've raised that standard so I can, look back on that. But it took me a lot of iterations to back and forth and negotiate with myself. And, we're all human. But at one point, I just drew that line in the sand. And I was like, all right, never again. And, it's been, I don't know how many years, but it's been beneficial for sure.
So I want to make sure that from my own experience, it's not that you don't ever partake in those things, because sometimes I will have a drink every now and then, or I'll have a sweet. I'm trying to think of different ways right now around my house because I just crave like chocolate. So my wife has come up with a few recipes that with a few chocolate chips inside, that if I could just get that little bit of taste, that would just really satisfy me in those moments of weakness when I want to go out and have a brownie or more. It's an amazing thing. So it's allowing yourself the place and the grace to have some setbacks, because I've had plenty of setbacks, trust me. And we're going to talk about setbacks in the next episode, so stick with us. That's going to be a good conversation. Greg and I got some juicy stuff we want to share with you. We're not going to maybe go into detail on that today for sure, but anyways, yeah, stick with us. We're going to talk about some adversity in the next episode. But with that comes opportunity to grow. You growing into that person. You mentioned about the whole 75 hard, and then you get to day 76, and then what? I can remember, so the mentors of mine, Earl Nightingale, Jim Rohn, those guys that have been speaking to me for a very long time, they would say to me before, and I think this goes along with what you were just saying, is that if, as you're achieving the goal, so if you were doing the 75 hard, for example, as you are achieving day 70 through the last part of it, the secret is to set then the next level of goal coming
Yes.
from that, not going back to zero.
Mm-hmm.
It's the art of becoming. It's not, so it's an ever increasing bar that, so we say a draw a line in the sand, but I don't necessarily mean it's a static line, or, you know what I mean? I think it's going to be a moving target, if that makes any sense. And if you allow yourself to overachieve in some areas, but then don't beat yourself up over when you have a down day or a down week, I think that equation or that thought process, if you can really just kind of sit with that, that's been my experience. Going back to the drinking situation, as far as alcohol and that type of things for myself, when I really first noticed this was during COVID, during 2020, the year of 2020. And I was just, as we all were, just laying around, not doing a whole lot. Work wasn't doing anything. It just was, so I was consuming way too much. And so I ballooned up very quickly over that year of COVID. I quickly saw that. So what happened was I saw a picture of that, of myself, I saw a picture of myself. And I was like, wow. So you talk about a standard. I had a standard of myself in my mind, what I thought I should be from a physical standpoint. When I saw myself in this picture, it was actually a graduation picture with my daughter. She graduated actually in 2020. And I saw myself and I'm like, wow, that's unacceptable. That is not that is not who I am. So once again, separating who I am versus what I did. So I quickly in 2021, 2022 basically cut it out. I'm pretty good at going cold turkey on a lot of things. I'm pretty good about just shutting it down. But unfortunately, 23, 24, I got right back into it again. It's unfortunate. I was running around with some folks that were consuming more than I normally would on a normal basis. And it just created a bad habit. I had lost track of this standard, this expectation I had of myself until about 6 months ago. Once again, I saw a photo. I talk about Rowan with my grandson Rowan all the time, and I'm usually shooting selfies with him. I'm taking all kinds of pictures and all this kind of stuff. And I looked at myself, I'm like, wow, I've done it again. I've done it again, meaning I've slipped back into this person or this habit of consuming more than I should, which has led me then to, because my drinking was leading to eating poorly, to not exercising well, to doing a lot of other different things also that I knew that's not who I want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, as soon as I recognized that for myself, I was able to then take corrective action on the flip side of that, which has allowed me then to relatively quickly start to see some results. So I love this idea of the whole standards, expectations. We can do that for ourselves. Any more thoughts? Because like I said, I can hog the microphone all day on this one. This has been a great, great subject for me.
No, I love the fact that you mentioned, day 76. Like I said, you have that decision, but yeah, you have to raise your standard, and it doesn't have to be a next big leap just to keep the
Right.
momentum going. It could be the smallest little thing just so you don't revert back to, you know, that previous standard. And the other thing you mentioned too was, the kind of like, you didn't mention it specifically, but the domino effect of you were drinking and then all of a sudden you're eating a little bit more. And then who wants to work out when you're hungover and eating like crap? Like that's the negative domino effect. But it also goes the other way with the positive domino effect. You're drinking more water. Therefore, you can exercise more and you're sweating more out. So you need to drink more water, and that kind of cycles back and forth. So you're feeling better. And that's the positive domino effect of setting those standards. And like I said, they don't have to be, reach high in the sky and, crush everything, because if you set standards that are very unrealistic, you're going to disappoint yourself depending on how you take self-criticism and all that kind of stuff. You have to really know yourself. But I love the fact that, yeah, day 76, for example, just keep it going and keep that standard going. And even if you increase it by 1 or 2%, it makes you not revert back. And that's the biggest thing, that, you don't want to go negative 10%. You rather go plus 1 or 2% to keep those standards moving forward and have that domino effect moving forward, not in the reverse. So I love those two connections you made.
Love that. Love that too. Yeah. It's just a matter of just stacking wins. Celebrate those wins too. That's one thing I don't do well for myself, is I don't necessarily celebrate the wins. I have a habit, and you might, listening to me today as well, have a habit of worrying too much about the future. So I don't necessarily appreciate what I've accomplished or am accomplishing currently in my present. I don't give myself enough credit for what I am accomplishing in the current moment. And I'm actively trying to do that. As I've mentioned in the episodes in the past, I'm actively trying to be a participant in the decisions that I'm making, which will then allow me then to participate in the outcomes as well. Having a friend like Greg to communicate this stuff back and forth with, having some accountability even on these episodes. So it really is, obviously I'm coming on here having these conversations with you, listening to me today. And so I don't necessarily want to go back to who I used to be. That's going to be interesting as we continue to move forward, as I continue to share real life stories, real life things that are going on in my life as we speak, how that will help me maintain that standard, maintain these expectations I've set for myself. I've mentioned before that for me, a big thing is that when I do that, when I set that standard or when I set that expectation for an outcome that's bigger than myself, when I'm not necessarily just doing it for me, when I'm doing it for a larger outcome, that helps me as well. So digging deep into that, why do you want to set and why do you want to reach whatever goal? I don't care what goal it is. Why do you want to reach that goal? If you can make that big enough, make that strong enough with who you are trying to become, who you are trying to be, That will then allow you to use those activities, use your daily activities to then continue one day at a time. As you mentioned, that domino effect, those small percentage wins every day, and they'll just start to compound to the point where you'll be able to slip on a pair of pants. This is going to sound silly. Right? I've got an old pair of pants that I used to wear probably pre-COVID that I would use to cut the grass in an old pair of jeans. For the last couple of years, I couldn't even get the freaking buttons buttoned. I couldn't even get the zipper up. I mean, it was that bad, Greg. And so, but just the other day, guess what? I slipped them on, and I'm not saying they were like loose, they were snug, but I actually was able to like get them buttoned. And I'm like, yeah, well, I need to celebrate that. And I did. In my own mind, I was just like, heck yeah, let's go. Because I know I'm on that path. And that's what I want to leave you with today, folks, is that encouragement that it is possible. I don't care how old you are. I don't care what your situation is. Yes, we all have challenges. As I mentioned, we're going to talk about adversity in the next episode. So if that sounds like something that resonates with you, join us on the next episode as well, because we're going to dive into some of the stories that are going on in our own personal lives right now, some challenges. But this is also part of it. You just need to make those decisions that you're going to change those standards, change those expectations of yourself, which will then help you do better in your activities on a day to day, and then celebrate those wins. I can't stress that enough. Yeah. Any more thoughts, man? Before, as always, I don't ever want to wrap it up too soon, but at the same time, before we start to bring this one in for a close, any more thoughts on these standards and expectations? I love this one so far.
Yeah, I think the last thing I would say, just kind of piggybacking on what you just said, is the impact on your self-esteem. When you put on those jeans, you're like, oh hell yeah, like I got these things on. They may not fit
Yeah,
100%
like I said,
great,
yeah, they weren't 100% great, but yeah, I was able to get them buttoned, dude. Yeah, I
but they
couldn't
were
believe it.
better. Yeah, better than they were 2 years ago or a year, whatever that
Six
time
months
frame is.
ago.
And
6 months ago.
I can tell you're excited about that, and that's
I
like,
am.
yeah, exactly. So that will impact your self-esteem when you have set those standards for you and you're doing the right thing, and all of a sudden the results show up, whether it's putting on those pair of jeans or whatever that is, whether you're in the middle of it or you get the result at the end. You have that like hell yeah moment, like I'm so glad I kept doing this, and I'm seeing the result, and it motivates, at least me, I can speak for myself, it motivates me to keep going in that one standard. And also, what else can I do, what other standards can I raise a little bit to get that feeling again? So I love that you touched on that. The impact on self-esteem is huge, though.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, folks, if you're struggling in different areas of your life, think about the conversation we just have had today as far as setting standards for yourself, raising your own standards, raising your own expectations. Who do you want to become? Start there. What do you truly want? I understand that's a very difficult question to answer. I struggle with it all the time. But I will tell you that as I continue to allow myself to, number one, ask the question first, but then have the answers come to me and not judge them, not worry about them. It doesn't matter where they come from, what they are, but start there. What do you truly want? And then set that standard that's what you're going to achieve. That's what you're going to continue to work towards. And with that setting of that standard, you're going to then begin to do things and be things in your life differently every single day. That's been my experience when I've had to accomplish big things, when I've had to pivot in challenging moments. As I mentioned in my retail environment, I used to have to pivot all the time because that place was obviously operating 24/7, 365. And I'd have to make some pretty quick decisions. But with that said, I had to keep those expectations high of my people. I had to keep their morale high for themselves to understand and have them see that if, as they did that for themselves, they then were able to lead these teams to an outcome, which was obviously a good sales day or a good whatever promotion we were doing or whatever was going on. My point being is that it can be in any area of your life, whether it's work, whether it's your personal life, whether it's your relationships, whether it's your health, whether it's your wealth. Think about those areas of your life today and see where you can't set these expectations, set these standards a little bit higher, and then seek people that are actively doing those things, whether it's Greg and I through the conversations that we're having here on the Rich Mind podcast or someone else in your close proximity. Find someone that's actually doing the things, becoming the things you're striving to become, and then just emulate them. What are they doing? ask them questions. You can ask us questions, info@richmind.co, and let us know, how can we help you? How can we serve you in terms of everything that we're trying to discuss here on the podcast? And we'd be more than happy to try to help you do that moving forward. So I think we're going to bring this one in for a close. We appreciate your time and attention. We really do. We love hitting record. We always have an idea when we hit record, but we just kind of let the conversation go back and forth. And I love that. It's been so much fun. I hope you're getting a ton of value in these episodes as well. If you wouldn't mind heading out to the podcast platform of your choice and leaving us a review, that would be greatly appreciated. Help us share these messages with your family, with your friends. If you wouldn't mind sharing this, if you found this valuable, or any of the other episodes. We have over 230, 40-ish episodes so far on the Rich Mind podcast. Plenty of things to kind of learn from who we are, where we're going, what we're trying to become. And it's really just been a diary of all the different steps, all the different things that I've tried to work myself through. And I know bringing on Greg here has been helping with me with that process as well. So go out there, have a fantastic day, focus on being great, work on these standards for yourself. I can't encourage you to do that enough. Think through your life. What do you truly want? Set that standard and then go to work and make it real. Have a fantastic day. Look forward to coming back talking about some anxious moments. We're going to talk about that in the next episode. It's going to be an interesting conversation. I'm curious where we're going to take that one. So join us in the next couple of days. It'll be a lot of fun. Have a great day. We'll talk soon. Bye now.